Rob, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
Tell me, who is Rob Rinder?
That's a very difficult question. People spend years in therapy trying to come up with that answer, so I'll have a go. Um, I am a middle-aged man who in life has had various hats and guises. So I've been a barrister, still am, a broadcaster, still am, hopefully a mentor and try to continue to be, and do my best to be a good friend and where I can contribute something to the community I live in.
Love that.
That's it.
I've so enjoyed listening and watching to a number of conversations that you've had, a number of things you've done, and amazing how many people when I talk to that you come in, they all say something different. Even just a minute ago, the hotels behind the scenes program, how much that's really recent. But right back to when you were Judge Rinder, that was really pioneering. I would describe that as brave. You were mixing a profession with entertainment. Did you feel brave in that moment?
Did I feel brave? No, not at all. Retrospectively, it feels like it feels like I was taking a desperate risk. But at the time that it happened, it felt like it was sort of part of some divine providence. Really strange series of circumstances that led to that. So it's not like, I woke up one morning and decided to be in television, you know. And I guess the ultimate lesson, if people don't get to the end of the story, is this: when you are feeling stuck in a job or in a career that you have become, let's say, ring fenced in because it's taking a long time to get there and it's gifted you a certain lifestyle and you're not loving it, and so consequently you feel emotionally depleted. I think you've got finite amount of emotional capital every day, and if you go and do a job that you don't love or like, I don't mean every day, but there isn't the possibility that you're going to delight in it. You wake up in deficit,
Yeah.
depleted.
Energy levels depleting every
Precisely.
day, right?
And you think, and there's only so much bankruptcy you can exist in before you end up spiritually exhausted. And I use the word spiritually for me very deliberately. So what happened was I was, had some success very young. I was practicing as a barrister when about 22, as a defense barrister. And the long and short of it was, had some, success and was at very good chambers. I'm still a member of those chambers. For your American listeners, that'd be very difficult to sort of understand what that is. But basically, we are independent advocates that wear the wigs and that sort of thing. You have your own sort of business. You're your own independent person within a club. So lots of solicitors were very kind to me in my early career, and I ended up at a very good set of chambers, as they're called. Did a lot of serious work defending, and then was invited to prosecute a case abroad. So, the job of a defense barrister, to an important extent, standing between the individual and the state, but in a big case, you look at all of the evidence, a bit like a Jenga game. And partly, is to pull out the one bit that's going to help your client. If things haven't been, or evidence hasn't been collected properly, it's important to hold the state to account, but that's a job. So you legally go, missed a bit, right? And it doesn't matter who your defendant is. You don't make moral judgments about who you defend, right? So I had the full dark buffet of every type of person who had committed various offences, from murder to terrorism to complex international fraud. And then I became a gamekeeper, let's say, having been a poacher. So there's a short story. And then, believe it or not, ended up, as I say, prosecuting a case abroad. I think when, there's a Greek phrase from a play that I can't remember, and people quote the wrong origin of this, but, when the gods want to laugh at you, they give you precisely what you want. And so I thought, I've got to get away. Wouldn't a desert island be nice? And I ended up in the Turks and Caicos Islands on and off for about 4 years with a bunch of police officers from this country building a case. And having never prosecuted before, it really changed my view and complexion, my attitude, let's say, to what I thought about the law. And then I came back to defend in a case, and I'd lost the energy. I'm very proudly Jewish, and there's only sort of one word that does it. It's koyach. It means like the strength and the commitment and the stuff that we're talking about that can replenish your currency, little increments of money to have joy for your job. I'd lost it. I'd gone to defend in a case in Croydon. Nothing wrong with Croydon, but architecturally it didn't help. And the defendant was the largest human trafficker in Europe at that time. I just thought I couldn't do it. I was absolutely depressed, and I mean that word very specifically bleak. And on around that time, I started writing scripts for friends who were actors at university or ideas. And a friend of mine that ran a production company, I went to meet with them and this woman at ITV. I didn't know who this woman was. Had no ambitions to be on television. She read this script, and I think she gave it her aggressively undivided indifference. I think is the best way of describing it. She may have said it was the worst thing she'd ever read, which I love because, I think no is a maxim we should all live by. Life is too short, right? Deploying kindness is important, but being honest is nearly always a first impulse that you should live by. And so she said it was terrible. I went back to court and I think I sent her an email. And she said, oh, want to do this court show. Could you be qualified to sit as an arbitrator? Which I could have been and I was. And the next thing, really fast forward, she said she'd like to put these things on television called Judge Rinder. I went to about maybe one TV meeting. I met this person in Manchester, Tom McClellan. And at every TV meeting, it's not like legal meetings. People just talk. And I just thought, these people speak. Nobody in this room is making a decision. What's actually happening is there's lots of ideas going round. But in the course of this commercial space, let's call it that, what's really going on, the dynamic, is that there's people who are trying to inculcate themselves in the success in the event that things go right and divest themselves in the responsibility in the event that it's a disaster. But nobody's actually making a decision. So this is just... In leadership was this woman, Helen Warner, the person who it turned out was really the last of a generation of maverick commissioners. And she said, we're going to make 20 shows. I didn't know what it was.
Straight from the outset.
No idea.
Pilot,
No pilot, no nothing.
And have there been court TV before?
In America.
Right.
They tried to do it here, but it hadn't really worked. Some say that's because of the they hadn't found the right personality. I don't know if that's true. I think the alchemy of a great production company, the will to do it, and some really thoughtful, brilliant producers came around at the right time. But I was so sure that this was absolute, pie in the sky nonsense, or in other words, most television meetings and ideas.
Sure. Do you think that helped you though? In a sort of a naive way where you look back and you're like, God, it became massive, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was awesome. I just didn't give it much thought. I just knew I was deeply unhappy and needed a change. And I genuinely couldn't think of anything else I could do. I wasn't qualified for anything. I could have gone back to university and perhaps finished my PhD and then become an academic. But I was stuck. I had a nice lifestyle. I was traveling around the world, doing important prosecutions, and that came with all of the social cachet, right?
Sure.
My Jewish mum was delighted that I was a barrister. I was on the road to becoming a KC, and then in due course, perhaps a judge, a high court judge. My roommate in Chambers had become the first Asian woman high court judge, who I admired greatly. That was the,
That's interesting. There's social acceptance there. There's financial. We all want to be financially successful. But
not crazy financial, but comfortable.
But you're not happy. You're not
Miserable
fulfilled.
Yeah. But the reason for that is because, and this is the essential thing, is because you have to believe and to some extent delight in what you're doing every day. This is the stuff that's away from the things that replenish you most, that gift you surplus. So away from your family, your friends, your loved ones, the things you choose or would choose to do. So if your work doesn't give you the potential to, as I say, restock, give you the kind of little increments of currency that are going to gift you surplus. Let's say if every day you wake up feeling, it doesn't mean it has to be great, as I say, all the time, but it's worth thinking about it instead that at the end of the week, what I do has value, that it's in some way going to bring me joy, that it has, and this connects to value, it has meaning, and that I'm doing something in this blink of a butterfly wing that is human existence that has some species of truth and purpose. I took a brief in Jersey as advising the government there on their independent inquiry into child abuse, which was very well managed. But because the prosecutorial and the legislative branches of government are in the same building, they needed to make sure that all of the papers were delivered to the tribunal at arm's length. In other words, hire somebody outside so that the community and anybody else looking at this could be satisfied that the judge got all of the papers. So I was sort of doing that, leading that, in fact. And then I flew over to Manchester, and the next thing was Judge Rinder. It was before like up phones and stuff. And I thought, what the f- going on? And having dealt with big international cases, case number one was, a woman suing her wedding photographer. And this woman came in and I said, oh, I'm so delighted you've brought your mother to court. That's my sister. And the most poignant thing, which I loved, and hopefully we'll be able to expand on, but if not, it's that I, just through sheer luck, really, had stumbled upon the most brilliant, mindful, committed, invested, talented group of producers that perhaps I've ever worked with, including one particular producer, series producer, who I'm still very, very friendly with, and we've become extremely close. And this gives you a sort of indication of my attitude and the thing I learned immediately. Case number two, somebody was suing somebody for about £150. Now, at that stage, I'd been freezing assets worth tens of millions and billions, and sometimes hundreds of millions on behalf of the government, making those sorts of decisions and so on and so forth. Anyway, so this person's suing somebody for £100, and I said, well, that's not a lot of money to this defendant. Anyway, there am I in all of my London privilege, knowing how much a meal costs and going to the theatre, and you're not getting far on that sort of money. So to me, that was my lived experience. £100 is not a lot of money, I thought. Anyway, bearing in mind, they've never really done a court program like this before, and Ofcom regulate this sort of thing. So all of the judgments have to be real, have to give full legal judgment. Both sides can apply for a transcript in due course if they want. It's taken deadly seriously. The person who's speaking in my ear, who can't ever say anything that's going to influence the judgment, but can tell me what's going on, i.e. there's evidence about to come up, or somebody who's the witness is about to come in, she's, if you like, choreographing the case. So she's not supposed to say anything that's going to in any way affect the decision I make at the end of hearing the evidence. So I say £100, that's not a lot of money. And forgive me for anybody who's from Birmingham or the Black Country, but you are great. And she whispers in my ear, with the whole world listening, after I say £100, not a lot of money, do you want to rephrase that? You sound like a right posh. And of course, she's absolutely right. And from that moment, I realized
You're still really young at this point, though, right? That's where I was going with the perspective and maturity now. You can reflect on that and go, okay, that was my perception. I go to the theatre and it cost me £100, and why are we fighting over £100? That's a huge amount of money to someone else, but you don't know that until you learn it. You learned it in full view.
Maybe, but you don't ever really want to lose your ear for that. And it's fascinating how financial privilege or success, how quickly, even with the encounters I was having daily, I was a publicly funded lawyer, a long period of time. Most of my clients were way over a decade from the most challenged communities in our country.
Sure.
But nevertheless, it's really interesting how quickly you forget about how much £150 is. When you go into a supermarket and, basic inflation doesn't really affect you, because if potatoes go up 20p a pound, it's not going to interfere significantly with perhaps your life or mine. But to millions of people, that means you're confronted with a really serious choice about whether you can feed your family or not.
Yeah.
And it's essential not to lose, as I put it to you, that your ear, that sense of connection with what the price of food and the value of things really are to most people who don't have the privileges that we have. And as soon as you start earning money, like I say, it's perhaps that's the first thing to go.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a few words there. Privilege. I've heard you mention that word in other conversations, and I think a key word for me is empathy. If I was to describe it, I've already used the word brave. And the reason why I mentioned that was pioneering something that you kind of found out how well it was going to go on the job. It could have not worked, Judge Rinder. Coming out about your sexuality, being open about your mental health. That's brave to me. The empathetic side of things that interests me is, even our conversation out there, you're present, you're interested, you use empathy as a personal skill. but professionally you were representing, you mentioned like the kind of the biggest human trafficker. How do you block out kind of, you mentioned it's like, I have no opinion on that because it's a job you've got to do professionally, but how do you kind of block out the kind of, empathetic side of things of, gosh, how could he do that and so on, to just focus on the actual job of defending him?
You have got to think about the sort of human impact of doing that job and also the mission of that job in the first place. And that's what I was devoted to. But, just to be clear, I don't come from what we hopefully will discuss is this overused word privilege. People who are born believing that they deserve to belong in the room, as opposed to what most people experience, this crushing sense of imposter syndrome, where you think, oh, why are you talking to me? Ask a grown-up or somebody posh. And this voice of mine, which you're probably aware of because I've given other interviews. I grew up in Southgate, round the corner from Amy Winehouse. This is artifice that I invented at the age of 4.
So it was a deliberate act.
Almost certainly. Whether I sound like I've been mugged by a Mitford or I've had a silver spoon placed somewhere firmly, but imagine whichever orifice. But it's not real. It's not how my brother sounds or anybody else.
So you're real. That's what's so
Well, I try
compelling.
to be.
That's a very young, that's a 5-6-year-old version of yourself. But actually, Rob Rinder's very real, very
Yes,
authentic.
but I think this is the artifice is because this is what I thought people who are clever sounded like, or posh sounded like, people who got to be listened to and were valued in the community I came from sounded like this. So I better jolly well sound like this. If I've come to discover and value in my own life, that's absolute.
Same with how we dress as well, right? The men particularly wore suits, full suits. If we were doing this 15 years ago, it's highly likely we would have been possibly even with a tie.
Sure, we make conscious and subconscious evaluations of people. We form views without knowing much about them. But in answer to your question, it's really important to remember that when you defend people, you don't go into a case, especially in this country. There are different ethical arrangements, let's say in some states of America, but in the UK. If somebody says to you, I am guilty, you don't go, shh, don't worry, we'll come up with something. That's not how it works, right? So this is a long story, but I really was and still am. I believe in it, but I'm not imbued with the same passion and mission, but I still hold it sacred. That if the state, this powerful thing that governs all of our lives, is going to take your liberty away, they have to be held to the highest standard possible. That liberty that we share is so totally, a word that I think about and reflect on a lot, sacred, that democracy under the rule of law is everything. And that passion, that sense of what that means in all of its magnitude comes from my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor. And when you've been brought up alongside or by somebody who's literally touched the face of tyranny, that knows what it's like for somebody's liberty to be removed and their lives even taken away without the state being held to the highest account, you know that what you do, standing between the individual and the state, is of limitless value to all of us. So what happens is when you look at a case, sometimes you think the evidence is really overwhelming, but you don't go into somebody and say, right, this is what you're going to say. You tell them, the evidence is really overwhelming. You should probably plead guilty. And then the job, if they say that they're guilty, is to do your best to mitigate for the lowest sentence possible. But you don't do that by just saying, Judge, I think we should give the lowest sentence possible. You try to use the law and to tell the person's story. Often because the person can't tell the judge or the court their story themselves. And people aren't born wanting to do wicked things. There's a whole series of events, a whole series of things, societal and other, that lead them to be sitting on the other side of the desk from you. And in many cases, you think they're but the grace of a teacher, a family, enter other things that mean that go I. But when it comes to the job, even where the evidence is really overwhelming, what the person's saying might just be true. I'm trying to think of an example. Imagine you live at number 1 Skeptical Street, and number 2 is Mr. Smith, and you've had a long and protracted neighbour dispute, and everybody knows you can't stand him. And he's probably a toxic individual, the type that sort of writes letters and has an anonymous account on Twitter. I used to represent some of those people too. That's why I'd never been upset when anybody's ever said anything mean about me on social media, because I used to represent these people, and I've seen the sea of human debris. There's not happy humans. Anybody that's got residual energy at the end of their day to write something unkind about somebody they know is not somebody any of us aspire to be. So fair enough. But that's your neighbour, Mr. Smith. He's really wicked, and over time you just can't stand him. And it's got really bad. All the neighbours know you hate him. And this particular morning, you leave, I don't know, just as the sun is coming up, the neighbours are out, perhaps it's the summer, and he's keyed your car. And so you say, Mr. Smith, I'm going to bloody kill you. And on the way to work, you phone your wife and say, I'm going to kill Mr. Smith. I've had enough. Or you're just angry. But, during the course of the day, you've texted friends and said the same thing. And just jokingly, you've been on Bloomberg or whatever at work. But you've nevertheless also how to kill your neighbour and make it look like an accident. But you kind of forget all about it, come back from work, and the sun's going down at this point, out of nowhere, because other people that don't like Mr. Smith, there's somebody that comes out of the bushes in a Judge Rinder mask and plunges a knife into Mr. Smith's back, a big old machete. You, out of sheer human altruism, run up to him, pull the knife out of his back.
Covered in blood now.
Right, turns over. All the neighbours come out at this point to hear what's going on. And as he looks up at you, he shouts, "Murder." I come and see you and I say, "Listen, love." I call my clients love from time to time. It doesn't look good for you. Your fingerprints are all over the murder weapon. Blood spatter is everywhere. You were phoning your wife all day saying you're going to kill him. There are searches on your computer saying I'm going to kill my neighbour. And what's more, as he looked up at you, he shouted, "Murder." And because it's a dying declaration, that's admissible in court, and all of the neighbours heard him say it. Your response, "It wasn't me. It was somebody else." Now, what you're saying might just be true. And it's essential, isn't it, that the jury, not me, not the judge, but
100%.
from our community,
Mm.
have the chance to evaluate it. Imagine a guilty person imagine an innocent person you knew had gone to prison for doing something that they hadn't done. And that happens. And when it does happen, the confidence that communities have in democracy, in all of the institutions that safeguard what it means to be free, start to dissolve. So I'll give you an example very quickly, I hope. In certain parts of America where they don't have legal aid, and that's one of the, or they do have legal aid because the Constitution guarantees a right to a lawyer, but these lawyers are under the cosh, they're very young. In this country, I wouldn't have done an attempted murder on my own until at least I was 7 or 8 years experience. In America, it just doesn't work like that. So imagine you're a public defender and you've got 50 cases, right? And all this stuff we can't do in this country, but this young person of color comes to see you, and in fact, you go and see him because he's being charged with armed robbery. And it's not him, but there's video evidence. And it's a mistaken identity case. He doesn't know who it is, but for some reason, there looks like him on the CCTV, and perhaps he's been there early in the day, so there's some DNA that they've got, which connects him to the scene. You go and, or rather, the lawyer goes and sees that person, and he says, "Look, it wasn't me, and you need to go and get an expert because there's other DNA samples that need to be collected, and you need an expert to show that face mapping is completely wrong. And also, by the way, I was here. I can't get to that witness, but listen, help me out here." And this young defender says, "Well, I've got 50 other cases. It looks pretty overwhelming. I've also spoken to the prosecutor, and what she's offering, even though you're here for armed robbery and the sentence is 30 years, an American type of sentence, they're offering to cut it down to a second-degree robbery. So the judge will only give you 5 years. They're offering a 5-year sentence instead of 30. So, and by the way, we're in a community where there's lots of white juries. I know it's going to go very well for you. And there's no money for an expert, by the way. Now, confronted with the risk of 30 years versus 5, knowing that you might be away from your family for that long, the rest of your life, what might you do? Now, imagine you knew one person to whom that had happened in your community. That person actually wasn't guilty, but they had no money for a lawyer, so they took the 5 instead of the 30. Imagine you won. Imagine you knew 30 to whom that had happened. What does that do to your relationship with the state and the community and how you're valued? Which is why having legal aid is so important in this country. And why, again, I keep coming back to this word, there are certain things about democracy under the rule of law which are sacred and which we can't be complacent about. But that was the mission of the job.
One of the things I was thinking then is in your position that the trust that you've got to have in yourself, the confidence in your own ability, let alone, of course, the jury in the way the system works, to come to the right, the right result, if you like. And just listening to that story you gave of the messages sent, the stabbing, the blood on the clothes, it's like, gosh, how many potentially cases have not been proven?
Well, we
Right,
do our
right.
best. I mean, we have
No, of course.
prosecution, and that's it. But
But-
mostly the jury get it right.
Good to hear.
I have to say.
Good to hear.
I found that to be the case.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you, but
Yeah.
I'll tell you where I was going is
Sorry.
the use of tech and AI in so many different businesses. Would it ever replace the role you have as a judge and the jury? But the question I also have is, because I think in a previous conversation I've heard you say, I can't see it. But if you look at football, the VAR, the ref has got the final decision. He's got the linesman and so on, but he's now also got, AI plugging in. We've got, you could argue that's cameras and so on, but it's extra information. And with all the information you have as part of a case, the algorithm could spin through and it cuts out emotion. And no matter, this is one of the reasons why I asked you the question about blocking out the emotion from and your own opinion from stuff. Like you mentioned that story with the £100. AI cuts through all of that. Do you think that will come into the system of judgment a lot more and in any way replace it?
I desperately hope not. If we reach it, what you're talking about, so it's often said that a great lawyer is dispassionate. In other words, she coldly and thoughtfully cuts through any of the emotional features of a case and goes directly to the law. Now, in some instances, commercial cases, let's say, that is right. Feelings don't sort of really matter. What happened between ship A and ship B, where, for example, there's some engineering or technical issue that resulted in an insurer not paying out. You can perhaps see in those circumstances a role for AI helping judges where human decisions are not the critical issue, but this sort of engineering feature is what really people are disputing, is at conflict in a case. You can see that being of some use to arbitrators and to the High Court perhaps, but those are a very narrow group of cases. If we reach the stage where AI is making determinations on the critical elements of how a jury determines a case, in other words, what you're talking about, the human stories at the heart of why people commit crime, then we're really in trouble.
I agree.
And let me give you an example of that. And there are so many. There was a case in which a woman, this is some years ago, sleeping next to her husband, gets out of bed. She boils water and puts in a very large bowl to a lethal temperature. Her husband is sleeping next to her. She takes the bowl, she goes upstairs, she pours it all over him. He dies. She deliberately kills him, right? Straightforward. Says AI. Why? Because the law is technical, it has ingredients. What's the mental element? Well, she intended to kill him or to cause GBH. That's called the mens rea. We don't have to look in a textbook. Legally Blonde will help you with that. It's the mens rea. What's the actus reus? Well, she did it. The man is dead. Well, AI says you're guilty. What if I were to tell you that that woman had experienced systematic abuse over 20 years to the point where she no longer had any sense of safety, not just in her own house, but in her own mind? Now, what evolved as a result of that case, which is called Alawalia, a very important case, is that she ended up, well, her murder conviction was reduced to manslaughter because a court of appeal, 3 human beings, acknowledged there are certain circumstances in which human treatment is so bad that your state of mind is so radically affected that, of course, you shouldn't be held to account in the same way as somebody who cold-bloodedly intends to kill somebody. Now, if a computer has that degree and depth of empathy at some point, then I think humankind is in real trouble.
Yeah,
So I hope not.
that's powerful. Yeah, and you're right. The circumstances have to be opened up, and it's interesting you say, and you're the same. You know, the judge in that case has to remove themselves emotionally, but actually, you're incredibly emotionally intelligent. So it's actually, you know, it's almost, the irony is you've got to be emotionally intelligent enough to detach yourself to do that. But in every other form of life, you are, you know, you bring humor, wit, and intelligence, academia into a whole conversation, which is far more than just being in the courtroom. You know, I explained that right. So you've actually you remove yourself from it, but you've got to be intelligent enough to do that.
You know, it's interesting, is I don't know if you feel like this, but there's almost nothing worse. You go to television meetings, right, and people give you compliments. I think it's a British thing. And I feel myself, whatever protruding parts of my body are on display, I feel that there's none left that that can cringe anymore.
Is that imposter syndrome?
To be sure, but I also think it's the stuff that safeguards us against becoming monsters. You know, when somebody compliments you, I think if you don't bristle internally a little bit, or have a thin degree of suspicion, you know, there's a very good chance that you're the type of person who thinks it's wise to invade Poland.
I suppose the best way to look at it is I relate it to sport. So Max Verstappen is killing it in Formula 1 at the moment.
Yeah, I wasn't into Formula until the
Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive on Netflix. Yeah,
who knew?
you're not alone.
So good.
So there's a history in it.
Made television,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Incredible. And the producers that have made and how it's cut. And again, you know, we watch that and delight in it, but we don't necessarily appreciate just the emotional intelligence, the technical gifts, and the general range of talent that goes into, and the editing that goes into creating a piece of work like that that galvanized the world and got me thought that it was just the most boring sport.
My wife watches it with me
Women,
now.
of course.
I mean, she won't watch. She pretty much might watch a race now, but no chance. You know,
I'm not going to watch a race
now, but
this is it. I just want the soap opera and the hot drive.
Isn't that fun? Yeah, that's good. Good to know, and clearly it's doing so well. But just using that as an example, drivers for years have had a certain amount of mutual respect, not doing certain maneuvers that could be considered really dangerous, and have wanted to win with the prestige of winning fairly. And then you get someone that comes into the sport that removes all that emotion. I don't care about that. I just want to win. It's just about winning. And that mindset, and it is a mindset, it kind of goes back to the whole mental health conversation, has been drilled into him from such a young age by his father, who had the same scenario. So without going into the details, you know, he'll win a championship at all costs, and it doesn't matter how he wins. That's quite dangerous, literally. And it's ruthless, and it removes a lot of empathy. It removes a lot of emotion. Whereas there are other drivers on that grid that would not want to do it. They've got the emotional intelligence to go, I could do that. It would probably allow me to win to do that, but I'm not going to.
Right.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Well, there's two sorts of impulses. Sometimes they're necessary. In the world that I'm in as a barrister and as mainly as a sort of now documentarian, I mean, I present to be sure, but the big work I make, you know, be it work on the Holocaust or extended peace in Israel, Palestine, etc., there are ethical constraints that mean that even if I wanted to get that interview and it was absolutely essential to the work, if it in any way sort of interfered with the ethical view that I took about the world or the standards that are thoughtfully set by colleagues, I was going to interfere with them in some way or undermine them. I wouldn't do it, to be sure.
I can feel.
Just because there's a spiritual cost to being that person. But most importantly, the work is undermined. But
Yeah.
there are circumstances which we have to acknowledge. There are forms of business. There are even moments in politics where winning at all costs, let's say, looking at the rules that are in place and the constraints that are there, frankly, shouldn't be followed. It's very difficult to determine when that applies. But it's nevertheless a universal truth that sometimes the most ruthless trader wins, sometimes, and makes the most money. Now, if you're in a world where money is at the epicenter of what you're trying to achieve and you're not breaking any laws, then why isn't that person a winner if money is at the heart of it? I can't answer that question. Again, in politics, depends what you mean when we think about winning. But let's say, you look at constraints on a government which don't appear fair to a government. There are circumstances where it's important to be, as we might say, ruthless. And sometimes decisions have to be made in a very difficult context, quite coldly. And whilst you can acknowledge that there are human emotions that have to be taken into consideration, nevertheless, the things that you're dealing with require such seriousness and have such existential consequence that ruthlessness and winning, as you might say, is essential.
Sure.
And the type of people who can do that and still hold on to their soul, those are leaders, and they're very, very hard to find and to come by.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
We don't sit comfortably with that. I have friends and colleagues who, as lawyers and leaders in various parts of our government, let's say, and I be careful about how I phrase them, who have to make extremely difficult calls. We in this country do our very best to be as ethical as possible when it comes to theatres of war, which partly I've been a lawyer advising in various issues there. Now, those require really challenging judgments. They're not cold and ruthless. There are rules, to be sure, that you do not want to ever break, but nevertheless, they're very, very hard. You don't want to be Max Verstappen in that moment and say, as he seemingly does what you tell me, You also have to be piercingly clear about making difficult choices, sometimes where the outcome might be really bad. That's hard.
Comes back to intelligence. For me, there's so much knowledge in you. And actually, talk about mental health. You've been incredibly open, and I think put yourself almost deliberately out of your own comfort zone at many times in your life, which has actually made you stronger. I'd love to know how you prioritize your mental health now, what works for you and what you do, because I use that term sort of maturity and perspective from earlier. You've been part of some really high profile, high intensity times in your life. You talked about burnout before, but just right now you seem really content today. Yeah, maybe that's me.
No, that's true. It's a delight to be here and to talk to you. So I'm really happy. I'm having a really lovely morning connecting with someone.
And I feel that.
Yeah,
this is lovely.
But it's a constant battle, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I wondered kind of almost how you combat that. What do you do? There's so many things we can do, from meditation to the gym to going for a walk in nature. Just wondered what works for you.
3 things. Finishing something in a day. For me, that's exercise. So don't get me wrong. I mean, it's nice to have an ancillary benefit if you eventually can get there and your body looks pleasant, but happily or unhappily, nobody's looking at mine. And also, that's not why I go. So I came to you from Barry's boot camp this morning. And the reason I go there, in addition to being a good workout, really, is because I put my phone away and it's a neat hour. You think about even this discussion, anything we do during a day, you don't really cross it off the list. And there's a little serotonin thwack, a little kind of gift of endorphin that you get simply by having worked out it's done. And it's, I don't know, sometimes I'll go at 6 a.m. and there you are, I'm done, ticked off, that's great. And all of these self-evident benefits that just exercising gives you, right? That and cold swimming. Secondly, which I'm really trying, waking up in the morning and doing your best to find gratitude. It's so essential. You know, however challenging, however corrosive the world around you is, however toxic the world presents itself to you, and boy, is it now easier than it's ever been in the history of humankind to be totally saturated by the darkness. Reminding yourself that that doesn't represent the majority of what the community around you think, and most importantly, finding something to remind yourself to delight in, and there's always something. That's helpful. Thirdly, not taking yourself too seriously. I think that's so essential. You know, one of my great heroes, Maya Angelou, it's worth listening to the last interview she did with Anderson Cooper. It's so wonderful. She was a great writer and public speaker, public intellectual, hugely influential. And she knew Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the lot, right? And this last interview pretty much she gave, she was talking about being an activist with them. People were very reverential to her, as you can imagine. And she said, you know, we used to cry together. She meant Martin Luther King and all of these people that actively changed the world. But we used to cry together. She said, but we also used to laugh. And she said, I don't trust anybody who goes around going, I'm serious, like they've got glue on the back of their hand. I'm so serious. You're boring as a I said, there's 3 elements of, you know, trying to do something that's a gift for you in a day, insofar as possible, whatever that is, and finishing it, finding something to be grateful in, a friendship, whatever it is, but it's good. Finding something good about the world, whatever that is. And lastly, remembering we're not here for long. So have pull yourself together.
We can get really complicated in our own heads about how self-important or how something that's affecting our day is actually it's nothing, right?
Oh, this is sort of funny.
Yeah.
I mean, also, like, the people I meet, you know, some of them are got all of these highfalutin jobs, and some of them are in serious branches of government. And, you know, being at university with some of these people who've lit their own deodorant cap.
I love that. And you bring humour to so much of what you do, including even really quite in serious conversations and serious situations. You bring humour. Is that deliberate? Is that something that you almost goes back to the acting days and the you know the 5-year-old that was bringing the voice into your world? You know, was it a coping mechanism, or does it come naturally? Because it feels to me like it comes naturally to you. You do it effortlessly.
I don't think I go into the world sort of consciously trying to be anything. I mean, we're the sum of all of our,
Of course,
all of the
organically
things
become
right.
Yeah,
But some things are just funny, and especially if you're in a challenging situation, you know, if you're in various challenging parts of the world, it's just funny.
Yeah.
You know, who wants to be around some po-faced misery guts? You know, and actually sometimes if you make everybody laugh, or especially if there's adversity, not only do you kind of lift the spirit, let's say, of the room, but it's a kind of fake it till you make it situation. That humor has a, you know, frankly, physical and consequent emotional capacity just to change the emotional chemistry of a space.
Disarms people.
Right. So, I mean, the best thing I did last year, which was life-changing, wonderful, although really annoyingly, because I had to go and film, I wasn't allowed to do the last day, which is only 20 kilometers. But they sweetly gave me a discretionary medal because nobody's ever left on the fun run day. I did the Marathon de Sable.
That's through the desert, right?
Yeah, and people all go, oof. And actually, they overthink.
Me included.
No, because you overthink it. It's basically a walk. I mean, in my case, I was doing a very hot mince for a long period of time. But I love deserts. So you're asking about my mental health, a thing that has gifted me more than anything else in my life has been 2 occasions. One, when I went for comic relief and was running across the sand dunes in Namibia. And then last year, crossing the Sahara Desert. And it's without question the most profound experience I've ever had. So it's 50 degrees. I was with, I would say, army colleagues, because I'm an honorary colonel of the Royal Corps of Army Music. but not really colleagues, because people I was with were badass, were badass. You've got people I was with were badass. You've got Heather Stanning, gold medalist, double gold medalist rower, Mark Nooney, who has won the military cross. And when he was told of his award, and it's extraordinary conspicuous, you get that for extraordinary conspicuous bravery, awarded at Buckingham Palace. He's a colonel, and what he did in dispatches is staggering, in a movie of its own. When his commanding officer told him, he said, "Whatever for?" That's that talk. Whereas if I had done that, the whole world would know. There'd be like a movie series about it. He's that person. And Paul Carney, who's top soldier, his actual job. So we're sort of running with each other. And the thing that's incredible and moving for me is that when you're in the desert, not running, just walking, one step in front of the other, no phone, you're conscripted wholly into presence. There's nothing behind you, nothing in front of you. The only thing that you have is the breath. And so it takes you physically and consequently emotionally to a place that is unique. It's no coincidence, I always think, that, I now think I should say that so many biblical philosophies have emerged from desert landscapes. Because when you're looking out and there's nothing to see, it takes you wholly inside.
No distractions.
Right. And when you have that sense of presence, people talk about it when they do yoga and stuff, which I've never been able to do, not least because I'm not very supple, and also the type of places I've gone to do yoga make me feel
I'm
vulnerable.
exactly the same. And I think I've probably got ADHD somewhere in there as well.
But also, you go to Primrose Hill and there's, have your own journey, and there's like 4 women who are putting their legs over their head, and it's really about being competitive. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
They're like sort of angry, the type of people that are on WhatsApp group and are sort of passively aggressively sort of telling you how marvelous their children are. It's that sort of thing. It's not my sort of. This is the opposite of that. It's the closest that I've ever come to being connected to the universe and the divine, whatever that is for you, to the point where there were days, a couple of days, I was walking. This happened in Namibia too, where for reasons I cannot explain or really meaningfully, adequately describe, I found myself just crying. And it was this
Outpouring.
exquisite connection with presence. And it was amazing. And it was, for about 2 months afterwards, I was on this endorphin tsunami. I was the happiest human in the world, if you'd met me, delighted to see everyone. Friends of mine sort of notice the difference. 'Cause I do have a tendency for depression and consequently to disappear and not to be around. And I'm just my best self. And that lasted for about 2 months. The problem then was, well, that was incredible, that connection. I need to go and find it again. So how do I find a way of having that moment of wonderfulness? And for me, it was very extreme. It was in the desert, but it doesn't need to be that. It could be a wedded, wherever you're most happy, your best self, let's say, that took you in with emotional surplus for the rest of the week. How do I get back there? Instead of having this sort of crushing fall 2 months later, go, what next? And that's the constant battle for me.
And what could you do? What can you do? That is, clearly you can't go and walk in a desert in the UK. But from an everyday point of view, is there something that
I did try and go to the Lake District, and it was lovely, but Cockermouth did not deliver on what I thought geographically it had promised. It's a very important part of the world for my family story, to be sure, Windermere especially, but it wasn't, apart from anything else, a pint there is like, 15 quid. It's more expensive than London. Is that about?
There's so many things you've done, and you're naturally curious. You're someone that is clearly always looking for new experiences. What have you not done? I'm probably relating this more to the sort of entertainment workspace that you would really like to do.
Well, you're right. I'm so surprised, and it's not just imposter syndrome. It's much bigger for me. It exists in a sort of slightly more problematic way. What I'm about to say is that a couple of years ago, it was like everything I ever wanted happened, and I was waiting. This is how I exist, and part of this is for me, I believe it to be a Jewish impulse, because although my family have been here for 2 generations, because my grandfather was a survivor, generationally we've always existed slightly existentially threatened. And part of the Jewish psychology, which plays an important role in my cultural, well, actually being brought up both religiously and culturally. If anything good happens, I'm sure it's not just a Jewish thing, I'm sure lots of people feel like this, but I believe it to be connected to that in my life. I'm waiting for the karmic thwack. Like if something amazing happens, I have to downplay it. Because if I say it's fantastic, the boomerang is going to come and then, I'm going to find something catastrophically wrong that happens. So
I know what you mean, actually.
So I've had so many opportunities to do things that I've always wanted to. I got to write a novel and it went well, and conduct some of an opera, and give a lecture about various things, and get a doctorate from UCL, and I make a program, Amazing Hotels, right? I mean,
Everyone's loving that, right?
living the dream.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
And that's something you wanted to do. That
I mean,
way, or
it came
you
to me, don't get me wrong, but if somebody says, would you like to go, and I had to speak a bit of Russian and French, but, I mean, if someone says, would you like to go Amazing Hotels and share them with the world? I mean, who's going to say no?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right, so all of this wonderful thing happens and continues. I get all these opportunities to do fantastic things and share stories, which is the thing I most care about. Prison documentary. As we were talking before, enabling and empowering people to connect with an idea through a human story. Now, what binds us is, I'm going to find empathy with you, not because you've told me to be empathetic, but because I've met you. And so that changes my view about the world, or at least helps me walk away thinking it's more complex. So whether that's telling the story of Israel, Palestine, and enabling people that don't know about that part of the world, or even if they have strong views, to go and hear the stories of individuals. They go, goodness me, that's complex. Or people have strong views about prisons in either direction, usually thinking that they are too lenient, etc. Fine, have that view, but at least have the emotional honesty to go and visit. And if you can't watch this program, that's the stuff I get to do. But it's been such a gift, and I make this work with such amazing people, or going around, art galleries with Rylan. It's been a delight, and consequently, people going to art galleries now, which were spaces I never thought I'd be able to go to when I was a little boy.
It goes back to the drive to survive Formula One. Your relatability, your relevance, and your way of putting things across brings people that perhaps weren't in it before.
You're asking, what do I want to do? The reason I wanted to share it is because I feel so like, if I say to you, I want to do this, it feels somehow that I'm lacking the gratitude of acknowledging what I've already done. At the same time as sharing with you the fact that when good things happen to me, and I've had so many good things happen to me, or when I'm invited to do something I've always wanted to do, and I've had so many opportunities to do that, I literally feel that I'm months away from the terminal diagnosis. I live with that shadow. And I think a lot of people do, don't say anything because you might bring bad luck down, So in terms of what I want to do next, I've got a new series with Rylan coming out, and I love that work.
You guys are great together. That's a great, I love it.
So when somebody asks me about intelligence, I point to Rylan. I'll give you two examples of it. One, I was doing the cryptic crossword one day. He's never done a cryptic crossword. He's just not interested in that sort of thing. He's never even looked at one. I was really struggling with this last clue, and I brought it down to breakfast when we were in India. He goes, what is it then? I don't know what's. Hold on. Right, it's this in it. That sort of real stuff. Not my stuff. I've read lots of books. I've done, let's say the work. I'm a kind of boring or a thick person's version of what an intelligent person sounds like.
No one would describe
No. It's an element. No, what I mean is it's earned. It's work. But the type of cleverness that I covet is his sort of immediate intelligence. It's a talent. You can learn to play the piano, but it doesn't mean you're going to be Horowitz, a great pianist. That's what he is. Yeah. When we were in Italy, I went to this room which had this fresco by an artist called Artemisia Gentileschi. Some people would have seen the program in Florence. And I know a lot about her. And the art curator who was there, an American from Florence, who gave me, well, she wasn't very keen on me. And I'm doing all the stuff because I'm so thirsty for this woman to like me. Find me intelligent, love me, you know what I mean? She's the expert. What does she want to hear from me? Some bloke she's never heard of, who she might have seen on TikTok, dealing with a case about some dog shagging a cat. She doesn't know what else I've done. or certainly doesn't care whether I got a PhD or not. She's the expert. Anyway, but this extraordinary building that's the place that Michelangelo, the Palazzo, he lived, a palace he lived in, left to his nephew, who's painted all of these paintings on the ceilings, frescoes, which are little fragments of Michelangelo's life, the moment that he was commissioned to paint the Sistine Chapel. And, I'm telling her about form and mansplaining, as my goddaughters would say, her entire life's going, "Oh, all right, And she's really not that interested. Then in comes Rylan. He looks up at this whole thing. He looks down at her because he's about 10 foot and she's 4. Yeah, it's like Graceland in here, isn't it? Of course, she instantly melts. She goes, that is exactly what this place is. Which is right.
Brilliant. Raw emotion.
Well, it's truth connected to impulse, connected to the sense of confidence and safety. Go, is that in it? And he's right.
Love that.
That's the real intelligence.
Say
Say
it as it is.
Say it as it is, but and feel safe enough to get it wrong.
Yes.
You're more likely to get it right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You must have an amazing barometer for BS, having professionally been in those environments. And so you must, the authenticity of someone, people you spend time with, which actually is true to everything I'm doing. Everyone that I want to talk with on Extraordinary Life Stories, I want to be able to just be myself, them be themselves. So I imagine you'll be really looking forward to filming with Rylan for that reason, because also everything's off camera as well. You've got time with someone you love, trust, and enjoy spending time with, right?
The BS thing is a really big thing. I've got to, I think, to have any meaningful talent, because I want to be emphasized. The type of things that I get celebrated for, all of this wonderful, you speak languages. Reality is, we go to 90% of the world, and especially in the non-Anglophone world, everybody speaks their local dialect, their national language, and at least English. And nobody sort of says, oh, you must be desperately intelligent. It's just part of the way you grow up. Here you speak some language, they go, oh, goodness me, you must be intelligent. You could be, thick as a plank. It just so happens you've had languages. I mean, it's naturally acquired if somebody's been kind enough to speak at you for long enough when you're a child. I must emphasize that. You never lie doing cases, but you're finding language. And most importantly, when you're cross-examining somebody, and I learnt from the most brilliant cross-examiner in the business, who could have had the most stellar career and is still extraordinarily gifted, but is a very complex person. What you're ostensibly doing when you're trying to, in not all cases, but most instances of cross-examination where the evidence they have is vital, is you're trying to find the truth, right? But you're trying to crowd out the noise of and you need to be able to have these sort of almost emotional antennae to trust your intuitive impulses to go, hang on, that's just and to call it out. I do think I have that. But the other thing is that it's because I've got a very low tolerance threshold for.
I literally wrote that down in my notes, that it must be zero tolerance for it.
Yeah, but what that means is,
But that's tried and tested over years of this
being on it, like, what do you think?
Yeah.
You go,
and we're similar age. We're actually, I'm 77 September.
You're younger than me, Tony.
But you get, there's definitely a tolerance thing that's come into my world where, that I'm less tolerant for it, and I need to be around authentic people.
Yeah, they're authentic, but I don't care what you say, just as long as it's real.
Yes.
You don't find language. I mean, there's sometimes, as we started this at the beginning, where if you're in a space where somebody can't change what's happening or the decision they've made, kindness is nearly always more important than truth. If, the sister of the bride is coming to you in a rather unhappy dress, it's important to find a kind adjective.
Yes.
Don't you look energetic or something? That's not a moment, for truth. Couldn't you? Well, obviously, that's sort of common sense. But most of the time, I just want somebody to feel safe enough to tell me the truth. And from there comes the best ideas. And most importantly, people use their truth. I think this is the only context in which it actually works. It means that you get a sense of what they're thinking about it, their truth. So the world that I'm really interested in, I introduced Rylan to opera, for example. And I can't tell you the number of times I've walked out you sit next to somebody, especially in the more expensive operas, and you've got, I don't know, I don't speak German, but the Baroness Elektrische Straßenbahn Haltestelle. That means, electric tram stop in German. So anyway, she said, "Oh, Rob, pearls are so hot." Wasn't that such a funny joke? That wasn't. It's Strauss. What's funny about it? It's not funny at all. You're only laughing because you're displaying. Didn't I get the joke? I mean, what?
Pompous.
Well, it's deliberately designed, that sort of display, to exclude others around you and to peacock, to signal to the world that you got it and you might not have done that person. Now, if you really get it, you can always tell. Right. And I hate that sort of thing. I'd much rather, and people felt, as I say, empowered to be safe, to go into art galleries and the things that I connect to that I think really enrich the cultural life of individuals and consequently society and humankind at large. As long as you have the honesty and curiosity, which are two elements that you can't live without, to stand in front of a painting, to sit in an opera, just to do that bit of work. If it touched you, great. But if you walked out going, "What a fine." But as long as you go on with intellectual, spiritual, emotional curiosity and patience, great.
Brilliant.
But it's not me.
No.
Because the problem is, it's not just me you're fine. I mean, no impact on me. And I know this is discussed a lot in the context of mental health and coaching and so on and so forth, but I think it's a message that I constantly hear from young men especially, but people in general. You're lying to yourself. You didn't enjoy it. And now not only did you enjoy it, you're now told a mistruth about something you enjoy, and you've got to go to the next one.
Yeah, and that self-hypothesizes into a life you're living. How many people are living a lie because they've gone down a route that's disingenuous to how they want to live, right? And it's
So liberating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Finally say,
but that fills you up. Really, really.
Am I allowed to swear on this thing? Sorry, it's
Too late.
Oh, it's too late. So, I really, really bloody hate it.
But you've been consistent with that. You came out about your sexuality really young, when it's now completely accepted and normal for people to do that.
Well, let me stop you there. It is accepted and normal if you live in London, you have a loving family, not necessarily London. If you live in an area with a gay life and in a country where there are no legal consequences, and you feel as confident as you can that you have a family that are going to support you with unconditional love, as I did, it's easier.
That's interesting.
For millions of people, and I mean millions of people, gay men and women, that's not their experience. So it's still pretty risky and terrifying.
Well articulated. I think that clearly the point I was making is you chose to. You could have chosen not to. So staying on that way. Thought process of
perhaps
living a lie.
You have met me.
Hey,
I mean, you have met me. I don't think I'd have persuaded anyone for too long.
But it's that whole I'm gonna put this out there. I'm gonna be honest, and then that way I can go down a route that allows me to be honest with myself, which manifests the things that you get to do, choose to do, and the people that come into your life, like Ryland, for example.
Yeah.
You gravitated to those people. You put out. Use that kind of antennae word, you put that out there, that the magnetism attracts, and I'm conscious of time.
Oh, sorry.
But I so enjoyed I looked forward to the conversation, and I feel like I've just pleasure.
The things I've been, yesterday I was sort of talking at people, and I find myself in these sort of conversations, and actually what you want is somebody to be kind of pithy and short, and I find myself sort of, worried and walking away and to share some sort of slightly anxious that I've sat and lectured you for sort of
not at all.
Everybody's sitting there in a coma.
I wanted to learn from you. This is not about me, right? It's about you. I've learned so much from.
Well, I hope to learn from you as well.
Well, let's 100% stay in touch, and let's do a round two, because there's so many things I still haven't asked you. But
stuff.
Have you enjoyed it?
It's been lovely. It's been a bit like a sort of free therapy session.
That's the best compliment you could pay me, Rob.
Which is really nice.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been a delight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.